Many thanks for joining us on the program. I am BC Adebayo. We begin in Malawi, where the Electoral Commission has confirmed June the 23rd as the date for a fresh presidential election after President Peter Mutharika's re-election last year was nullified by the courts. The Constitutional Court had in February ordered a new presidential election be held within 150 days after the annulment. A statement from the Electoral Commission's newly appointed chairperson, Justice Chifundo Kachali, said the date was set by members of Parliament in compliance with the Supreme Court's order. Mr. Kachali warned of logistical challenges but said that they would consult presidential candidates to explore reasonable mitigation measures in delivering a credible election. There are concerns that the country is yet to get all the money it needs for holding the poll at a time when it's dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. We're ahead now to Burundi, where the power vacancy is expected to last for a few more days, and that's according to the government spokesperson, who says they're still consulting the Constitutional Court on the succession of Pierre Nkurunziza. It says the court is studying the power vacancy as there's uncertainty over who's going to take over the presidency after Mr. Nkurunziza died on Monday at the age of 55 from a cardiac arrest. The late president was preparing to hand over power to President-elect Major General Evariste Ndayishimiye in August. According to the Constitution, if the head of state dies in office, then the Speaker of the National Assembly, currently Pascal Yabenda, should succeed him. And in South Africa, the Constitutional Court has delivered a landmark judgment declaring the Electoral Act as unconstitutional, saying the current legislation strips eligible citizens of the right not to form or join a political party. The court ruled on this morning that the act needed to be reviewed over the next 24 months to ensure that independent candidates could stand for election. This comes after an appeal application by the New Nation movement and others seeking to set aside the Western Cape High Court decision, which dismissed their argument that the Electoral Act was flawed by not allowing individuals to contest national and provincial elections. Delivering the judgment, Justice Umbusiyeli Madlanga stressed that the Electoral Act must strive for a reading that did not limit the full effects of any rights afforded by Section 19 of the Constitution, which details the rights of citizens to make political choices.
To the parties. Insofar as it makes it impossible for candidates to stand for political office without being members of political parties, the Electoral Act limits the Section 19(3)(b) right. The question is whether the limitation is reasonable and justifiable as envisaged in Section 36(1) of the Constitution. None of the parties' affidavits dealt with this question. Although the absence of evidence on justification does not exempt this court from the obligation to conduct the justification analysis, I can conceive of no reason to hold that the limitation is justified. It is thus declared that insofar as it makes it impossible for candidates to stand for political office without being members of political parties, the Electoral Act is unconstitutional. The appeal must succeed. In accordance with the principle of objective invalidity, a declaration of invalidity that is not coupled with a limit to its retrospective effect would invalidate all elections that followed the first election under the Constitution.
Zimbabwe's National Security Council has dismissed reports of an impending coup, saying the country is stable. The council accused allies of former President Robert Mugabe and some opposition leaders of peddling the rumors. Home Affairs Minister Kazembe Kazembe accused several groups of anti-government activism, including foreign diplomats. He named opposition figures who he accused of spreading the reports and church leaders who he said were giving false prophecies. The country had been in lockdown since March to prevent the spread of coronavirus, but it was somehow eased in May. Joining us now is Nigel Yamutumbu, a Zimbabwean journalist, for more on this story. Good afternoon, Nigel. Thanks for joining us on the program. Now, help us to understand what led to the National Security Council dismissing reports of an impending coup in the country.
Always a pleasure being here. Well, in what would arguably rank as the most bizarre and baffling statement that the government of Zimbabwe has made since the ascension of President Emmerson Mnangagwa in November of 2017 is the statement made by the Home Affairs Minister in the presence of high-ranking military officials and security officials, to the effect that there have been rumors of an impending coup or unconstitutional takeover of government. What makes this particularly bizarre is that governments, when they are dealing with such grave matters, do not normally go public and merely deal with the impending security situation or to thwart the coup without necessarily pronouncing itself publicly. And it's also not clear as to where these rumors have actually really been peddling and by who and on whose authority, judging from the statement, as it is as ambiguous as it gets. And there could be a lot of theories that could support or augment that all is not well in Zimbabwe, and perhaps the center is not holding.
But the council is accusing allies of former President Robert Mugabe of spreading these rumors. But does this mean that there is perhaps an infighting amidst the ruling party?
By implicating former president, the late Robert Mugabe's allies, as the ones behind this purported military takeover or military coup, government is essentially affirming what pundits have been arguing, that the events that transpired in the country in November of 2017 are actually not over. And what we have been seeing within the political arena in Zimbabwe is the manifestation or a playing out of the factions within the ruling party that have been in existence since the time of General Mujuru and the current President Mnangagwa. The unresolved succession issue of President Mugabe that dragged for more than 2 decades. So in a way, we are still really seeing these forces trying to test each other. But what is of concern is that these are an elite pact, and they have really nothing much or nothing insignificant to do with the people of Zimbabwe.
Before I let you go, Nigel, tell us what's the situation updates with the country's fight against COVID-19?
The novel coronavirus pandemic remains a crisis in Zimbabwe, with in excess of 300 cases now having been confirmed to have contracted this deadly virus. Government is still implementing lockdown measures, and we are in the level 2 lockdown, in which we are still indefinitely within that phase with reviews here and there. The most significant review being that of a national day of prayer and fasting that has been declared by the presidency and cabinet in the country, which would also see the opening up of churches, but with limited gatherings of 50 or less people and following the laid out guidelines.
Many thanks, Nigel, and please keep staying safe. Now, as the world continues protesting the death of African-American George Floyd in Minneapolis by a police officer, the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission is lending its voice to the movement. Led by the chairman, Honorable Abike Dabiri Erewa, and the Director General of the National Council for Arts and Culture, led by Otuba Olusegun Rushewe, the organization is calling for justice not only for George Floyd, but other Black Africans and Nigerians in diaspora who have been victims of violence, brutality, and racial discrimination. Mrs. Dabiri Erewa asked for respect and dignity for all races and that the world should never again be made to witness what happened in the streets of Minneapolis. She also encourages Nigerians and all Black Africans to connect back to the continent that is home, where they will be overwhelmed with love and the spirit of togetherness. And we begin our coronavirus coverage with the latest figures from Africa. The continent's COVID-19 cases now stands at 210,124. From that figure, 109,042 are the active confirmed cases, and more than 95,000 people have recovered, and the death toll stands at 5,600. South Africa still has the highest number of cases on the continent, standing at 55,421, and is followed by Egypt with 38,284 cases, and Nigeria with 13,873 cases. Ghana and Algeria are next, hovering at over 10,000 cases each. Meanwhile, the countries with the most fatalities are Egypt with 1,342, South Africa with 1,210, Algeria 732, Sudan 401, and Nigeria 382. Kenya plans to discharge nearly all the asymptomatic COVID-19 patients to free up space in congested hospitals. The government has released guidelines for home-based care for discharged patients, which include at least 10 days of isolation. Patients with no underlying health conditions and have suitable space at home are also eligible for discharge. Community healthcare workers are expected to be involved in the daily assessment of the patients at home. The East African nation has confirmed 3,094 coronavirus cases so far. Kenyan journalist Teddy Otieno gives us more updates on this.
The Kenyan government actually said that it plans to have hospitals discharge the COVID-19 patients so they can go and recover at home. The CS for Health, Mutai Kagwe, added that if the move was implemented, it would then free the nation's health facilities from congestion. Now, there are two health facilities in question, Nairobi, Mbagathi, and Kenyatta National Hospital. Now, Kenyatta, Nairobi, and Mbagathi are already approaching their full capacity. So the CS noted that the Ministry of Health has actually completed the process of actualizing home and community care protocols so they can be rolled out and implemented countrywide. What does this mean? It means that several people who are in isolation facilities may actually get to be released and taken care at their homes on condition that it is in accordance with the World Health Organization protocols. Now, the Cabinet Secretary added that having studied what other countries are doing, it is time that the country can also start implementing its own systems depending on the environment as the only way that we can be able to cope with what they're expecting in the future. Now, remember the WHO has its own regulations when it comes to quarantining or self-isolating persons who may have dignified access to ventilated single rooms where one can actually recuperate without sharing immediate space with other people. Now, this pronouncement by the government has, however, raised questions on how, or rather over how people who live in informal settlements in the country where the numbers of infections have been rising will get to achieve this. So living conditions in these areas, just to point out just a few things that we can be able to point out, characterized by things like poor sanitation, there is lack of access to clean running water, and of course the congestion that comes with it. So these conditions make it ideal for the virus to spread.
Many thanks, Teddy Otieno. Now, domestic flights are expected to resume here in Nigeria from June the 21st, and that's 3 months after the country initially closed the airports across the country. It appears the airport authority is reshaping the domestic terminals to accommodate social distancing among passengers while protecting all stakeholders. Our aviation correspondent Bukola Joe Oketumbi reports.
Aircraft parked at the airside of the General Aviation Terminal in Lagos owing to the coronavirus pandemic that has grounded airline fleets around the world. By the 21st of June, these Nigerian-registered planes will probably take back to the skies with willing passengers.
Those airplanes have been kept. When we are going to bring them back into service, we will ensure that they are airworthy and that they can make those flights and safely.
When flights resume, passengers, however, will be welcomed with the 2-meter distancing markers outside the terminal, a glass barrier that protects both customer service agents and passengers, and the wearing of face masks will be compulsory. Passengers will also be required to obey the distancing in seating arrangement while they wait in the departure lounge. Away from the preparations for local flights in Nigeria, the International Air Transport Association says the global airline industry is expected to lose a whopping $84 billion in 2020, making it the worst in aviation history.
It's a disaster for the industry, but we are not authorized to fly or to cross borders or to bring international passengers, so that our raison d'être, the reason why we are working, has disappeared for weeks, for months. So it explains why we are in such a difficult and tragic situation.
The global airline body believes that now that countries are opening up for flights, all the conditions put in place for safe travels be strictly implemented. Bukola Jo Ukitumbi, Channels Television News.
And in the midst of Somalia's battle against the coronavirus, a grieving doctor finds peace. British doctor Jihan Mahmood made her first grief-stricken visit to Somalia last year to bury her father in the land of his birth. Finding solace in the city he loved, she stares on in Mogadishu until a chance meeting thrust into the front lines of the fight against COVID-19.
Jihan Ali Mahmood traveled from the UK to Somalia for the first time last year to bury her father. Finding solace in the city he loved, she decided to stay, and when Somalia recorded its first COVID-19 case in March, Jihan knew she could help. A junior doctor back in the UK, she took a leading role as Somalia's only national COVID-19 call center, providing a lifeline for people seeking advice or treatment.
People who actually have the symptoms, and then we give them advice to isolate themselves and stay away from their family members and in crowds. We give them the help they need, which is to basically transfer them to a hospital. All that information is prepared first and foremost by the operators and then sent to us and then to the doctors who then follow it up.
Somalia has more than 2,000 confirmed cases of the coronavirus, and dozens of people have died.
I know some people personally that have died or have known of people that have died of COVID, and it's unfortunate, but this disease does not discriminate. It will take lives anywhere you are in the world.
She often spends 16 hours a day analyzing the data from 6,000 to 7,000 phone calls a day. It's grueling work for Jihan and her team. She says her mother worries about her.
She's always worried for me about if I'm eating well, if I contracted the disease because I have asthma, and if I'm well, if I'm overworked. She worries about the normal mom stuff, but she also tells me about how proud she is of me.
It is also dangerous with the constant risk of attacks by the Islamist group Al-Shabaab. Despite the violence and the pandemic, Jihan has found a home and a vocation on the front lines of Mogadishu's fight against COVID-19.
Over now to South Africa, where some 31 schools in the country's Eastern Cape province have been closed because of coronavirus. According to the national broadcaster, the South African Broadcasting Corporation, 15 teachers, 3 learners and 2 non-teaching staff tested positive for COVID-19. The Education Department spokesperson in the province, Loyiso Pulamani, said some were closed for cleaning as the schools had been given guidelines on what to do when cases necessitate cleaning and what they should reopen, after a few days. The Eastern Cape province has the second highest number of cases in the country. The government is preparing for an upcoming surge in the province, according to Health Minister Zweli Mkhize. South Africa's Education Department had postponed the reopening of schools for a week to finish preparations. Staying in South Africa, hairdressers have had to offer more home service to clients since the lockdown in the country to curb the coronavirus pandemic. One of them is Beauty Matunhira, who's been going to clients' homes in Johannesburg, armed with dye, relaxer and gel, ready to tackle her next client with lockdown hair. Discreet house calls have become routine for her, and she found herself out of a job when salons and barbershops were forced to close under South Africa's coronavirus lockdown, now in its 11th week.
When you think of businesses that operate in the shadows, one you might not consider is hairdressing. But in South Africa, Beauty Matunhira is risking jail by visiting her clients at home. Hairdressers are still banned from working under South Africa's lockdown, now in its 11th week, even as the country partially eases its restrictions. For Matunhira, discreet house calls have become the norm.
There are few who are allowing us to come and do their hair at home. Some they're afraid. Because when getting inside their complex, sometimes we have to sneak. Sometimes we have to bribe the securities. Sometimes we have to hide inside their cars, clients' cars, so that we enter the complex.
For the hairdresser, the risk is worth it so she can buy food. Her client is Kofowurola Ehiagwina.
We actually do sneak in a stylist or anybody I need to fix myself for me. I sneak them in too. But it has been hard because of this COVID-19. It has been hard, really hard.
The lockdown is taking a heavy toll on hairdressers and barbershops.
No work, no income. I'm the breadwinner of my family, and our business is the main source of income. And I mean, it's kind of difficult. I had money, but I didn't know the lockdown is going to be like extended to another 2-3 months. And I mean, the government don't want us to work. And if we open our shops, it's against the law. It becomes criminalized.
Mariska Duplessis, the Northern Gauteng Divisional Manager at the Employers Organization for Hairdressing, Cosmetology and Beauty, said an industry survey in April showed that around 70% of businesses were contemplating closures and job cuts, and up to 21% had already shut forever.
And that's where we end today's program. Thank you for watching. I am Bisi Adebayo.